Writer Jeremy Whitley joins us today. Thanks for joining us, Jeremy.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. What's going on with your work these days?
Oh, I'm staying busy. I'm writing everything from some of my usual. I've got more My Little Pony books coming out later this year. I wrote my first, I think, full-on graphic novel romance, Navigating with You, which is out later this year. I had another graphic novel that's more of sort of a darker, more adult fantasy story come out from Titan earlier this year, and then I've got a dozen other things I'm working on any given day, depending on when you
Nice.
ask me.
I see you have a large growing catalog of works. So, well, you are a writer of graphic novels, or we might call them comic books. What is there a difference there?
I like to say the difference is how many librarians are in the room. Um, because I mean, to me, it's the same thing. They obviously are a little bit different on the number of page counts. Sometimes people will say comic books when what they usually mean is sort of like floppy, staple bound books that are,
Like the
20 to,
old-fashioned paper
yeah,
issues. You the vol. I guess is that a volume or an issue or
an issue, yeah. And then in a lot of cases when we talk about trade paperbacks, which are usually just sort of the square bound collection uh of comic books. And then I think we've adopted graphic novel to mean very long comic. um but I think there's not a real practical difference beyond just sort of the way that they're published.
do you do both? You do issues and then the full length?
Oh yeah, quite a bit of both. I think especially in the middle grade and YA market, there's much more of a call for books for full length things rather than uh, comic books, which are usually only sold now in sort of specialty shops, comic book shops. So they're much more for an adult audience. But I do occasionally squeak some comic books through now and then. The My Little Pony books all come out as single issues before they're collected and reprinted, things like that. So
I know you do have a number of collections, compilations where they've packaged them really nicely into hardcovers, even the multiple issues.
yeah, hardcovers are really nice because
Yeah.
I'm so used to having the staple bound single issues which tear up very easily, to the point that it's sort of become a part of collecting to try and keep them as not torn up as you can. um and yeah, I had a lot of when Princeless, which was my first real successful book, started coming out. I had a lot of librarians complain to me that the trade collections, the soft covers, would get absolutely wrecked. They'd have to buy another one every month, and well,
Wow.
I mean, from a financial standpoint, that's not a terrible thing
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me.
that's
But
true.
but I would like, I do like to support libraries, so having a hardcover that they can keep in stock and will last through at least a couple of kids reading it is nice.
Yeah, that would be good. So how long have you been doing this now?
Oh, I think overall, I think from my very first stuff, we're coming up on probably around 15 years. Princeless, which was my first like really professionally published comic, is hitting 12 years now. And then I've been doing it on sort of like this is sort of my main and or only job for about 5 years now.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough to stay sort of in that because it is all freelance, so it's a lot of trying to it's like playing whack-a-mole but. With your financial stability.
That's scary. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how did you get into this? So you started as a part-time thing?
Yeah, I went to school for creative writing. I went to UNC. um and as most creative writers do, I came out and had a job working at Blockbuster. I guess they don't do that anymore. um but I worked at Blockbuster for a few years while I was trying to like figure out how to get into writing as a job, and where I wanted to go from there. Um, and ended up sort of working with some good friends who were artists to make our first couple comics. My very first comic was called The Order of Dagonet, which is a book I made with my artist friend Jason, which was about a basically all the monsters of ancient Britain from Arthurian times and earlier all sort of came back, and the only people who could fight them are the Knights of England, who currently are all actors, authors, rock stars, things like that. So picture Ozzy Osbourne and Elton John fighting dragons and things like that. So,
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, and that one we self-published, and we took around to some conventions, and um, had limited success with. Um, and then the next real thing I started working on after that was Princeless, which I self-published the first issue of, and then was picked up by a small press, and we sort of kept going on that for. I mean, it's still technically going on, though it's sort of paused at the moment.
Are there old copies of those early editions out there still?
Yeah, it's pretty rare that I see, especially the self-published ones, other than I think I have a couple of copies on hand around here somewhere. But they have a different artist, completely different art style. It's much more like it's much more obvious that I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, as opposed to sort of learned on the fly with comics, and sort of figuring out what it is that I'm doing, and how it works, that's different from any other sort of writing.
When you were a creative writing student, did you know that this was what you wanted to do? Is this the genre you wanted to write in?
Um, Probably not in the sense of comics, because I don't think I'd really considered it too deeply. I had read comics as a kid. I'd been really into superheroes and stuff like that, and um, like I said, a lot of comics are only really carried in specialty shops now. So living in sort of rural Western North Carolina, I'd fallen out of it. I hadn't had a lot of comics to read for years, and then um, you know, living in Chapel Hill, uh, I sort of discovered comic book stores again, and then I think is at the point that I realized, like, oh, there are people who just do the writing here. You don't necessarily have to be a extremely talented and very fast artist in order to write comics. Um, you get to work with those people and benefit from their skill. Um, so I think uh, I always loved genre stuff, fantasy and sci-fi, and the sort of things that I still get to write in comics now. But I feel like the creative writing program at UNC was very slanted away from that. They didn't really want genre stuff. They push more for literature. I as I've said on panels before, they really like stories about 20 something men being sad. Um, that was a lot of my creative writing program, was people being sad about things.
A lot of sadness, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an opportunity not to kind of dwell on those kinds of same things. The content is very much different. It's you have action adventures, you have uplifting, you have a diversity of different work here. So you really probably jump from different emotions, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes more drastically than others. There was definitely a point at which I was writing. Um, I I distinctly remember the strangest group was at one point I was writing superhero stuff for Marvel. I was writing My Little Pony stuff for IDW, and I was also writing Vampirella, which is like fairly violent, adult comics for another publisher. And at that time, I was just sort of like, I'd finish writing the issue of Vampirella and be like, all right, now to move to My Little Ponies. Oh, I think I need to go walk around for a while first, and I don't. The ponies cannot stab each other. That can't happen. You can't.
Yeah, that's an
Unicorns cannot
abrupt
impale
shift,
people.
right?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I
So it's a big shift, and I think I think it's something we used to really have to say a lot, but I think it's becoming more and more evident to people that comics is a medium rather than a genre. So there's a wide variety of stories that I get to tell in comics, and comics does even more than that, from action superhero stuff to all ages fantasy adventure stuff to romance stuff to horror stuff. There's a little bit of everything out there.
So many genres within that medium of comics. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I haven't really done it personally, but I know a lot of some of my friends have really uh, done well in sort of like biography and stuff within comics. Books like March, which is won all sorts of awards for being a comic book about the civil rights movement.
I have a colleague at NC State who did a history of the voting, and he's the writer of the book, and there's an illustrator, and I don't know if you know Tommy Jenkins.
It's a timely thing to be writing about.
Yeah, I guess so.
Fortunately.
So you could go any which way with this. I mean, there's so many different topics that do you you have originals, and then you have other obviously parts of these franchises that you do you approach them, or do they approach you, or how does that work? How do you get started with one of the, like the My Little Pony franchise? You've done a good number of those issues,
Oh
right?
yeah, I think officially, as of the last one I've written, which they haven't been announced or come out yet, I will be at 60 issues of My Little Pony comics that I've written.
Wow, that's
Um,
yeah.
it's a lot. I've written more of those than anybody else, which kind of snuck up on me. Um, but uh, Ponies was an interesting one because that was my first sort of work for hire gig, where like I got recommended for that position because I met a guy who was a big fan of my work on Princeless, and he introduced me to his friend Tony, Tony Fleece, who was working on My Little Pony as an illustrator at that point. And he said, these other two who started off the franchise, Katie Cook and Andy Price, often work as a team, and I want to like take them on. We want to get more of these sort of gigs because they're sort of the big deal ones, and they usually work together. Do you have any interest in writing ponies? Do you know anything about it? And at that point, I had a 3-year-old, and I was like, yes, I do know quite a bit about My Little Pony, because it was a I don't know, a life-saving device at that point. You can only take so much Dora the Explorer. If you have any experience with preschool cartoons, they are often and intentionally rhythmic. They hit the same beats every time. Dora may be exploring a new place this time, but she is going to need to solve this problem and this problem and that problem to get to the final thing. And she's going to run into Swiper at some point, and she's going to hit these same beats. And my daughter was obsessed with that, and I was going insane. So it was like at that point, anything that was not that was a nice change of pace. And My Little Pony was something we sort of stumbled on. Obviously, I knew of like the brand and everything from when I was a kid, and we watched a couple of episodes of Friendship is Magic, which is the newer series from a few years back, and instantly I was like, oh, this is funny. Like these are characters. They have real traits. There's real jokes in here. It's enjoyable to watch, and so I was like, this is so much better than that other thing. Yes, you can watch this whenever you like. So Tony came to me and asked if I was familiar with it, and I was like, I know all about it. I've seen all of the episodes at this point.
Wow.
And yeah, which at that point we were like into the 3rd season, so it wasn't that many episodes. But I was like, yeah, I could definitely like write these characters. They have very clearly defined voices, which is one of the great things about the show. And so he sort of pitched me to his editor over there, a guy named Bobby Kernow. And Bobby, just pitch me some ideas. Tell me what kind of stories you want to do. They were just starting up a series called Friends Forever at that point. The sort of concept was Like anybody who's read an old Marvel team up, it's like this is a story about this character and this character doing something together. So you just sort of pitch two characters together having an adventure. And I think I sent him about 5 or 6 ideas, and there were 2 of them he really liked. And so I got to sort of write full outlines for those, and then eventually they became sort of issues. I think 2 and 7 of Friends Forever, and then yeah, 10 years later, I've written 60 issues
Wow,
of
that's
Pony Comics.
incredible. Yeah. What age group is that for?
Um, I think it appeals to a very wide age range. I think it's specifically meant for like young readers and middle grade readers. So
Who are
um,
learning to read and improving their reading skills at that point?
yeah, and I think certainly having the pictures there helps with kids learning to read. They can infer a little bit and
Sure.
figure some things out from there. But yeah, I think it has all that, but we also like we make a lot of jokes in there and references that I think only diligent parents will understand. Um, my friend Andy, who does a lot of the artwork for the book, is fond of throwing in visual references to like Magnum PI in the background and things like that. He has a recurring Magnum PI pony.
Oh, that's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Raven pirate princess, that those issues.
Uh, so yeah, that it's spun out of Princeless, which the original concept of Princeless was that there's a this princess Adrian is locked in a tower by her parents to wait for a handsome prince to come rescue her, and she decides to break out and save herself and go off on a quest to save her sisters, who are all similarly locked up. Um, and we got a few volumes into that, and we were working on the next volume, and I had a lot of fans of the series had questions uh, about Adrian's sexuality, about whether she was gay, and my answer to that was always sort of like it's beside the point for that particular story, um, because the point needs to be that she doesn't need to be rescued, and it doesn't need to be that she doesn't want to be rescued because she doesn't like men. That sort of defeats the purpose of the original point. But there was obviously like an interest there among the people who were reading the book, and I really liked the idea of writing a story in that universe with a queer heroine. Um, so we sort of created Raven and introduced her in what ended up being the 3rd volume of Princeless, which is also called The Pirate Princess, where Adrian rescues Raven from a tower, and they go on a little adventure themselves, a little bit of a rivalry there. Raven is a daughter of the pirate king who has been sort of betrayed by her brothers and is on a quest for revenge and to get what's owed to her. um, and so they have a little adventure, and then Raven goes off on her way. And so we spun Raven off into her own sort of um, YA action adventure series, where it's sort of a much more explicitly queer cast. Even most of the characters in the cast are somewhere in the LGBTQIA spectrum. Um, and yeah, I think that it also I think pirate adventures sort of lend themselves very well to that anyway, just because of the sort of escape to the high seas and running from the law elements of being a pirate, and also of being a queer person in that sort of world. So we sort of built out this cast for what I refer to as the big queer pirate soap opera that ended up turning into.
Wow, nice. Well,
Yeah.
for Titan, you also did Sea of Thieves. So that's a similar pirate, right? In a way.
Yeah, I think this has never been confirmed for me, but I think Raven Pirate Princess might be what got me that job working on Sea of Thieves, because it is first and foremost a video game, and they were working on producing the game. Uh, Rare, who is part of sort of the larger Microsoft family of studios, um, was working on this game, and they wanted to do uh, a comic, and they sort of pitched the idea to Titan of working with me to do this um, comic based on their world, and it was an interesting job because the idea was like Sea of Thieves is a big open world game, so you don't really there's not really a main character other than you just make yourself, you put together a crew with your friends and you go out on the oceans and have adventures and um, fight fight other pirates and skeletons and dig up treasure and all that fun stuff. But they didn't have a main character, so they said, just you guys go ahead and make up your crew for what you want the story to be, and we just sort of integrate them into the world, and go wherever you want to. They were very open-minded with what kind of story we told. Their biggest thing was they wanted to integrate like stuff that's in the game. So whereas working at Marvel, they'll have a lot of plot elements they want me to get in. Sea of Thieves, they were like, we really want you to shoot somebody out of a cannon, because that is the thing you can do in this game that people, our players, I think, will really love. So the game was still sort of in alpha testing at this point; it hadn't even come out. So I was oddly one of the first people outside of Rare to play this game because they wanted me to have a feeling for what it was like. I was sailing around on a big empty ocean with
Wow.
just a handful of other people. Yeah, and it ended up being, we made this big story about these two characters who are a brother and sister who are actually the children of sort of a legendary pirate in the game. And we had them sort of set against each other on this race to claim this treasure of their fathers. And each has their own sort of crew. And it's fun because we got to tell this story, and we didn't know if there was going to be any more to it. And they've since brought us back to do several volumes of other stories within the world. But I think one of the most fascinating things about that job for me is that the characters we created ended up becoming sort of recurring characters in the game, including one of the characters we created, a character named Lasidi, who is sort of the sister in this brother sister duo, has become sort of the like spokes character, sort of icon for the game. So she pops up on a lot of their advertising, which was interesting for me because walking into San Diego Comic-Con a few years, I saw like the face of this character that I had helped create for this comic, like 30 feet high on the side of a billboard, and I was like, hey, I know her. But she pops up on chip bags and Mountain Dew cans and things like that from time to time. Anytime Xbox has a partnership for a thing, they'll use her in a lot of the art for it.
So it's your venture into video games then.
Yeah, my first one. I've done some small writing for video games. I mean, that's something I'd like to do more of,
Okay.
but it's a whole different world than comics.
I saw on Netflix not too long ago a documentary on old toys, probably the toys we grew up with in the 80s and 90s. And it was a documentary that kind of looked at all different brands. It had My Little Pony, an episode for that. I don't know if you've seen that. There's a G.I. Joe episode. And somewhere along the way, and we watched all of these, and somewhere along the way, somebody makes a point that, well, about one of the toys is they didn't have a like a TV show or anything, and so their idea was to get the product made into comic books and get those out. I forget which one it was, but that was their kind of their commercial strategy was to you need something in the hands of the
Sounds
kid.
like ROM Space Night to me. Um, yeah, because ROM is one of those that like exists weirdly as a toy and a Marvel comic book for a few years, and
Both at the
yeah,
same time. Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, interesting with and then of course having a TV show is another component. And now we have video games, so you add that in as well.
yeah. I've had the experience of getting to write for a few of the kind of, I guess, nostalgia properties. I've done My Little Pony, of course, but we at one point we're doing a revival for Rainbow Bright for Dynamite a few years back, which
That's an oldie. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean that's an interesting one because for like the amount people know about Rainbow Bright or know of Rainbow Bright, there's there was surprisingly little story there. So like trying to fill in the world and adapt it to a comic series where we could be like, what is any of this about? Was a fun task.
Another one that caught my eye was the Vampirella one that you mentioned earlier. Tell me about that one. That one's
So Vampirella is a character who's been around since the 60s and has been through a lot of different comic book iterations and has been owned by a lot of different companies. Um, and is sort of, I think, best known for her sort of ridiculous swimsuit attire thing. But she's a very like, what attracts me to her is she's a very like early pulpy type character where she's the sort of sci-fi that they're like, we don't know exactly where she came from. She's a vampire from space. um and her origin changes every few years, and she's proved to be, I feel like, a really adaptable character in that sense, and that she is basically every decade they reinvent her. And so I got a chance to come in. Paul Cornell was doing a series over there with her, and he was getting ready to leave. And they were like, would you like to come in behind Paul? And I mean, first getting to work with Paul is amazing. He's done so much stuff from comics to Doctor Who to everything else. So like the opportunity to like come in behind him and basically he just set it up to where there's a sort of like somewhat of an Armageddon situation at the end of his run anyway. It was all very sort of deep in the future. So I was like, yeah, I love the idea of taking this character Vampirella and doing sort of a Mad Max thing with her. She's nearly impossible to kill. So, throwing her having her, flying over a group of trucks with guys shooting at each other with guns and flamethrowers, and her, diving down and taking people out and everything. It's a really like uh fun thing to throw around in a comic book. So she was a lot of fun to play with. And it's outside of, I think, anything that I'd done at that point, just because uh I think there's a tendency to pigeonhole people into the sort of, oh, you write kids comics or comics for younger readers. So um that is one that I have to like stock at the other side of my table. There's a couple of things that I'm like, the kids probably shouldn't read this one.
yeah, yeah. How about your work with Marvel? What was that like?
um, it's it's a real learning process, I think, working with any of the really big continuity heavy companies. Um, because uh, a friend of mine accurately described it at one point as sort of like building the track while the train is moving, because it's every month there's going to be something coming out. There's 50 other comics that are in the same continuity, so you'll plan on doing something and then you'll find out next month that character that you were going to use is dead. So you have to do this other completely different thing. It's a whole different beast because um, there is so much sort of superstructure of corporation over everything that they'll have they'll have a lot of ideas of what it is that you're going to write before it ever gets to you. In some cases, we have this big event, we have this big thing that's happening, we need something to do with this character. During that time, you have to get them from here to here. What you do in the 10 pages in between those things is up to you. um, so it's fascinating. There are a lot of things that I did that I have done at Marvel that I loved. I got to have the character of Gwenpool sort of discover their asexuality in their story and come out over there. We dealt a lot in Unstoppable Wasp with our main character discovering that like her father Hank Pym, she has bipolar disorder, um, and sort of dealing with that all within the larger context of all the crazy superhero comic book stuff that's going on at any given time. Um, so trying to do all of that in that same sort of structure while all that everything else is going on um, is always an interesting task. Sometimes made more difficult than it has to be. But it's nice that I think with those you reach such a much larger audience than I can ever hope to with smaller books generally, my own independent stuff. Um, but I, in the chances that I've had to like do good work there, big interesting things, like it's always amazing to me that the impact that it had, the number of people who've come to me even 5 years after the WASP stuff ended and said, oh, this had such a big impact on me. I felt like people were like somebody was seeing what I go through, or that I've even had a few people that have come up from that book and said specifically like, oh, this helped me figure out what was going on with me in my life. I was dealing with this bipolar disorder. Made a huge difference. And that's, I feel like as a writer, that's always the sort of thing that you're like, that's what I want to hear. Like that my work had some sort of impact on people. It's nice to get to do it in such a uh, big and prestigious room as Marvel is.
Well, I do see a lot of social issues throughout. It's a common theme throughout a lot of your work. So there's real life issues like you were just talking about. There's a lot. I think there's a lot of feminist issues that come through. How is that? How do you feel about that? How is
It's always been important to me. I mean, I think you know a lot of those issues have always been just important to me from a base level, but I think um you know I grew up on comics, and it was always I always loved comics. I always loved superheroes. My dad was a big nerd who introduced me to all that stuff from a young age. Um, and it dawned on me that when I got married, that my wife, who's a black woman, had grown up with some of that as well, but had sort of been like squeezed out of that market. That a lot of the comics that had been created, I think, since the 90s were aimed specifically for what they feel like is their target demographic, men ages 20 to 60. And so there'd been a lot of like the characters of color and female characters who had just disappeared. And that, girls at that time were not really growing up reading comics, especially not superhero comics. And it was something that I specifically wanted with Princeless, was to be able to share the medium of stuff that I love with my daughters, and for that to be a thing that they could share with their friends, they could read with me, and that they could uh, identify as a thing they loved when they got older. And there was very little of that. I think at the time that Princeless came out, it was the same time that like Marvel didn't have any solo titles with female heroes coming out, and um, DC had just sort of done the New 52 relaunch, which was much more like boy based. They got rid of a lot of the female characters, or sort of put them on the back burner. They didn't have a whole lot of female creators writing or drawing at that point. So it was a big thing for me at that point that I make something that would mean something to them. Um, and that I think is proven out to be something that a lot of other people cared about, that a lot of other people wanted. Um, and that has always felt like an obligation to me. Is Princeless is the book that brought me into comics. So I feel an obligation to continue to make things like that uh, care about social issues, that have something to say. And beyond that, those are the sorts of books that I seek out myself, is books that have something interesting to say, that don't necessarily hew to the same types of stories that we've been telling for, in the case of Marvel, 80 years. We need to make sure that we're bringing in new audiences, and that we're telling new types of stories. And I think that is borne out a lot in the wider comics world, that we've seen characters since I started Princeless. We've seen characters like Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur and Ms. Marvel, and sort of this wide variety of new and exciting types of characters. And there's certainly a much wider variety of people behind the scenes as well now. Um, and those are things that I always want to make sure to have in stories. I think it's important not necessarily to try and tell the types of stories that ought to belong to other people that they should have the chance to tell, but to include a diverse group of characters in the stories, and to, for me, I think reflect a world that is the world I live in. It's the world I see. Um, a lot of people, I think, misinterpret the concept of write what you know as write about stuff that is you, rather than like write about the world that is around you, and um, you know the stuff you're writing about. Um, so it's always been sort of important to me to include the messages and the people that I care about in the stories, and to try and find uh, those types of stories and characters that aren't being told already.
Yeah, it makes it real and relatable. And
Yeah, I think it's a big thing for me that uh, I write the sort of stuff that I want to read too. That because if I'm not the audience for my book, then how do I know who the audience is? It's just guesswork at that point. Um, and I think the best thing about writing the books that I have and chosen to write over my career is that I get cool people coming to my table at conventions. I'm excited to see the fans and people that come up. There are a lot of old grumpy pros that um, would rather just be left alone by the sort of people that want to come get their signature. But um, I am I've been doing this long enough now that every once in a while an adult woman walks up to my table and is like, "Oh, I loved Princeless when I was a kid," and it's it's a it's a twofold thing of like first going like, "Oh, I'm so old." This adult person grew up on my comic, but also
right.
like
Oh,
they're here, like they're at the convention. In a lot of cases, I've heard from a lot of people that Princeless was their first comic, the first thing that they read in comics, and they've gotten into comics largely because of that, and that is incredible to me. Even if it's not their favorite or the most formative, that it's the one that got them interested and got them in the door is huge.
oh, wow, nice.
Yeah.
That's meaningful. Do you go to many conferences and conventions every year?
Um, this year I'm certainly going to quite a few. I had slowed down around COVID and everything like that. Um, but this year I'm headed out to quite a few. I'm all over the country, and then doing a My Little Pony convention in Germany as well this year.
Wow, that's big.
So yeah, I'm all over the place.
Nice, nice. You like the social aspect of being a writer though too.
Yeah, I it's interesting because in a lot of cases it's the only time I really have to hang out with my colleagues, such as it is. They live all over the country and the world. There are plenty of people that I have had a very fruitful and exciting working relationship with that I've never met.
Wow, in person, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So going to conventions is neat because a lot of times I either will meet somebody that I know and have worked with, for the first time, or somebody whose work I'm a big fan of. Because that's the nice thing about comics is I'm a really big fan of a lot of other comics as well. So getting to meet and see those people, and getting to hear from fans as well is really fantastic. Getting to really know the people that like have had some life changing experiences thanks to comics one way or another. Which actually like largely is what my next book coming out, Navigating with You, is sort of about a romantic relationship that forms over a shared love of manga in that case, but comics in general, which is not an uncommon story I've heard at comic conventions.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So that one's set to come out soon.
Yeah, that one is coming out in August. It is from Maverick, which is the YA imprint of Mad Cave Studios. Yeah, and um, it is a romance with two female leads about sort of them putting together this book club to read this manga that they had both gotten into as kids, but had never been able to sort of finish, um, and deciding to go through all of that together, and then ending up sort of falling in love with each other over the course of collecting and reading that story.
Nice, nice. Oh, I look forward to that.
Yeah,
But
it's a lot of fun to write. I don't get to write as much romance stuff working in comics, but I love to write. Romance and horror are two of the funner and sometimes harder to sell as comics stories, but are a lot of there's some of my favorite sort of genres of stuff to work in, and getting to do that and have it be something that's sort of largely influenced by the experience of having been one of those comic writers that have had people come up to the table and tell them about all these marvelous bonding experiences, meeting their best friends and boyfriends and girlfriends and stuff over comics. It's great.
have you written any horror?
um Trying to think if I've written anything that's come out yet. I think like I've written a lot of things that are a little horror tinged. The Cold Ever After definitely has um, some horror aspects in it, as well as sort of noir and fantasy stuff in there. I'm working on some horror stuff that I'm hoping I'll have a chance to get out soon. But I think as far as like pure horror stuff, I haven't had anything actually come out beyond maybe a couple pages here and there.
You've worked with a lot of different other writers and of course the artists, the
Mm-hmm.
illustrators. Uh, you probably don't even have a number, right? Do you have a number, an idea of how many people you worked with?
I have hundreds at this point, I'm sure.
Wow, wow.
Um,
Is there
yeah,
somebody you partnered with more than anybody else?
um, probably it's probably Emily Martin, who's my artist on Princeless. I've worked quite a bit with Emily, um, and then there's three or four like main artists in My Little Pony that I have worked with quite a bit as well. Um, and then I have several sort of ongoing graphic novel series that have the same artists. So I get to work with a lot of the same people quite a bit. Um, but then every once in a while, working for somebody like Marvel as well, I have um, worked with people who are heroes of mine as far as comic stuff, but also like people who are on the other side of the world who have to go through a translator to get
Wow,
scripts and
really?
things like that.
Wow.
Yep. My second volume of Unstoppable Wasp was illustrated by Guri Hiru, who's a two-woman art team who are in Japan. So all of my stuff going back and forth through them goes through a translator. Worked with folks in Italy and Bangladesh and um, all over sort of Europe and Asia and South America as well. Navigating with you, my illustrator on that, Claudio, is in Brazil. So,
Does translation process ever become difficult?
um, more often, it's the issues with translation are more often funny than they are really difficult. Um, I tell a story occasionally about working on the second volume of Unstoppable Wasp. There's a part in the story right at the beginning where she is learning to drive, and got a blower going right outside my garage door. Um, I do. Sorry, the wonders of lawn maintenance. Um,
I have the leaf blowers that come around, and I don't even know what day they come. It's I live in a community, and they just
yeah, same here. He's just blowing around dirt and grass at this point.
yeah,
I don't know what he thinks he's doing.
yeah.
But yeah, so working with Gurihiru, I sent through a script at one point for the first issue of that run, and in the story, Nadia is learning to drive. She's got Jarvis in the seat next to her, and they're sort of um, driving through the streets of New Jersey, and she hits a bump. And in the story, I'd written that the car goes flying through the air, meaning that it was jumping off the bump and gliding. And when the art came to me, there were booster rockets on the car, and it was literally flying through the air. And I it was one of those things that, talking with my editors, I was like, well, that's definitely not what I meant, but I think it might actually be better.
Keep it.
We should just leave it like that.
Really? Did they
Yeah.
leave it?
Oh yeah. So yeah, the I think it's the second or third page of that story has just them inexplicably, the car has boosters, which it's a Marvel universe, it's not unheard of.
Sure.
I think they literally ended up drawing the Coulson's car from Shield, which has sort of rockets on it, so it ended up working out. It's very funny mistake, but one that I was like, no, that's actually better. It's which I think is a lot of like, that's a lot of the learning process of comics, is to sort of learn what your artists can do and learn when they have better ideas, and just sort of like don't get too attached to the process. Because yeah, if you're working with like experienced comic book artists, they have a good grasp of like what the page is going to look and feel like, and they will have ideas, places they want to say, they'll say, what if I threw in an extra panel here and it would help this flow better? Or would it make more sense if they were doing this in this panel? And yeah, not feeling too much of that like pride in the script to admit when there's a better idea is, I think, one of the things that separates this from like working in prose, where you've got the last word on everything. You don't have to worry that somebody might come in and do a better version of what you had in mind, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you own the thing or not.
Was there a work that you came in, that you were hired to do, that was perhaps like a dream job?
Um, I have a way of I don't know, getting excited about almost everything that I work on. So to some extent that does happen. There's I think probably the clearest version of that was right before I started writing Unstoppable Wasp, and then Mark Waid, who was writing Avengers at the time, had just created that character, and he said, do you want to come in and work on this issue of Avengers with me that's going to sort of lead into what you're doing in Wasp? And I was like, do I want to write the Avengers with Mark Waid? Sure. Like, I can't ask for a better proposition than that. That's a great gig. So that was, getting to do that was really, really amazing from that point. But to like, get to work with a lot of the artists that I do on those things, and really get to see like their process, or occasionally have somebody draw something that is somebody that I have been reading and seeing comics and stuff that they do for years, is pretty extraordinary. Because that's the sort of wild thing about working at somewhere like Marvel, is occasionally they're just like, hey, this legendary person is free this month. Do you think they do a good job of drawing this comic that you're coming up with? And it's like, yeah, sure, why not? That sounds great.
Is there anything you're still really looking to do that's on your mind that you?
Yeah, there's always a lot of things. I think I've got a couple of creator owned pitches that I really love that I would like to see find a home somewhere. Um, I would love to get a chance to do more stuff with some of the characters that I really care about, like the X-Men. You know, I got a chance to write a short X-Men story at one point. Um, I'd like a chance to do more stuff with them. One of these days, I would love a chance to work with DC and get to do something for Wonder Woman, who I'm a big fan of as well. Um, there's tons of them. It's I don't know that there's one in particular that I'm just dying to get to, but I'm always excited to try new characters, and it's interesting to get to work on a character uh, who I know really well, who I haven't got to write before. Because I mean, I ended up helping Mark with more issues of Avengers down the line, and one of the issues had Spider-Man in it, and I was like, oh, Spider-Man! I know what Spider-Man sounds like. I know what he should say here and what he should do. It's Spider-Man. So that's always a really interesting thing, because I don't necessarily think of myself as a Spider-Man guy, but like getting the chance to write stuff with him, I'm just like, oh, this will be so cool.
So knowing the character and building the character, is that the most important part to your writing?
I think so. I really love building worlds in general. So like whether it be the characters or sort of shaping, big fantasy world stories, things like that. I love sort of the character and the lore are a lot of my like favorite parts of it. I love, you know, getting characters who feel like real people, who feel like people I know to some extent, um, and to really like tell stories with them that feel real and important. Um, that's always a big thing to me. But yeah, uh, I like getting to sort of build out those characters and give them voices and make them, people I'm excited about writing.
Have you independently produced your own work? Are you continuing to do that?
Um, we'll see. I've done some like other. I haven't done any self-published stuff in quite a while. But I worked with a lot of small publishers. I think I have enough places now that for the most part, I don't like doing a lot of the like bookkeeping and the very useful and important work that goes into like making and selling comics. I really like doing the writing part. And I think early on I was uh doing my best to get all that other stuff, to push it off of myself as much as I could. um but yeah, I think like it's been um it's been a process of trying to decide where I want to go with things, and find homes for stuff. There are some books out there that if I don't manage to find a publisher that is excited about them, that I'm excited about enough to find a way to self fund or kickstart something at some point.
And when we search your name on Amazon, you're not to be confused with another Jeremy Whitley who does puzzle books. I don't know if you've seen.
No, no, I don't do the puzzle books. No,
Okay,
no
okay.
crossword puzzles or any of that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I have seen that Jeremy Whitley started popping up a few years ago. More luck to him, because I don't want any of that.
Sure, sure. A lot of your work is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And are there other places, obviously, comic stores? Or is there a particular place that you would recommend?
um, I always recommend checking your local comic shop. I know here in Durham we have Ultimate Comics, which have one of those in Durham, Raleigh, and Cary. They're a great store. Anything that they don't have in stock, they can order for you. They will. Um, and they've been very supportive of me and my books and a lot of other smaller creators. But that's always my recommendation, is to check with your local shop. If they don't have it, check with your local bookstore. If they can't get it, then yeah, I prefer a brick and mortar over, say, an Amazon situation. And most of my books are available one way or another through either a comic book store or a bookstore.
Do a lot of those stores do online ordering these days?
Quite a few of them do. I know a lot of, especially the bookshops, work through uh, the what is it, bookshop.com or whatever. I know in Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh, you have Flyleaf in Chapel Hill, Regulator here in Durham, and um, Raleigh's is Quail Ridge.
Well,
Yeah, all local bookshops that are all like very supportive of local authors, have people in to do signings and all sorts of great things. So I would
that's
absolutely recommend them.
bookshop.org or com. I'm not sure. I forget.
Ivy.org.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
I can link to some stores though below.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know all of them have some amount of online ordering. So I would absolutely recommend, between Ultimate Comics and those three, checking all of those out, especially if you're local.
A new reader, what would you recommend they read first from your catalog? That's probably going to depend on, you have so many different, it's going to depend
Yeah.
on the person, right?
It's going to depend a little bit on what sort of stuff they like, what age group they're in. Um, I think at this point, the biggest stuff for me, I try to recommend uh, books that can be read sort of independently without a whole bunch of knowledge of other stuff. Um, Princeless is currently a little difficult to find in some places. It's out of print. It has some issues with the publisher there. But I would say absolutely, like, School for Extraterrestrial Girls, which there's 2 volumes of, which is put out by Paper Cuts, is great. You can pick that up anywhere. That's sort of a nice YA book. As far as like middle grades and younger readers, The Dog Knight, which we just published last summer, is a great sort of middle grades action adventure with a non-binary hero at the center of it, which is a lot of fun. Um, and then yeah, we have if you're an adult, you're more into sort of the grown-up fantasy stuff, like a game, like a not terrible Game of Thrones, those sorts of things. Cold Ever After, which just came out earlier this year from Titan, is really fun, and is much more full of gore than my normal stuff. So I mean, that one is a lot of fun, I think. And then of course, Navigating with You, which is coming out in August, is what I'm very proud of, very excited about. That I would definitely recommend to everybody. It is a YA romance, but I think it's something that everybody can enjoy.
What are you working on now these days?
Well, let's see. We're putting the finishing touches on Navigating with You as it's coming out. I am co-writing a book that has been announced with my friend Ben Kahn, which is called the Dashing School for Wayward Princes, which is all about a group of princes who get sent to a school that's supposed to teach them toxic masculinity because they're not princely enough. I am getting ready to. We've got the 2nd volume of Dog Night coming out, and the 3rd volume of School for Extraterrestrial Girls. Those are both being drawn right now, and I'm working on working with a friend who designs games on a tabletop game right now that has not been announced, but hopefully I'll get to talk more about later this summer. But I'm very excited about doing stuff there, and then of course I have like a dozen other projects that are not yet announced that I can't talk about yet, but
Sure.
we'll continue to we'll continue to be talked about as I can. So
Great. Well, I look forward to reading some more of your work and getting to learn about your new projects. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah, great to hear about all the process. And I think you're writing really meaningful books that this work is meaningful and it really has, really connects with the audience. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really hope that's true. That's what I go for.
Jeremy Whitley, everybody. Thank you.